Light Echoes is an ongoing photography project that started the end of 2023 when the theme in CST was collage. I take pictures mostly with my iPhone when I'm on walks in my neighborhood or in my community, and I use them to create digital collages. Recently, I had the opportunity to think about grief and loss. I'm going to be explaining the symbolic language that's universal to my work and walking through my art practice while I was processing grief and this fear of loss. I want to be very sensitive to anyone who does not need to hear about these topics right now, because that's a perfectly acceptable choice too. If this isn't the right time, please feel free to turn off the sound. You don't need to read anything, and you can turn the sound back on when the images are over. When I have to go through challenging emotions, my art practice is the first thing that I turn to. And what I learned through that practice led me to this Light Echo series called How to Hold Grief. I'm showing and discussing the work I made in chronological order over a period of 3 weeks, from November 23rd to December 19th, 2025. The first piece I created is called Inhabiting Uncertainty. In my work, lines are symbolic of pathways through life, or journeys, and circles that can be read as moons can symbolize the heart, the part of us that metaphorically grows or contracts. But circles are also doorways or portals we might choose to open in order to alter our path. When I got to this point in this particular composition, I knew this was what I needed. I knew it was complete. I was reluctant to add or subtract anything from it, but it made me uneasy. It seemed unbalanced and it had competing focal points and empty spaces. So I took some time to think about why I didn't want to change anything. And then I understood that this piece was about uncertainty and that helplessness and that lack of focus that grief can make us feel. This image, this was my own doorway into the fear of loss. Looking at this position, I could now unroll this big map of me and put my finger on the spot. I am here in the middle of uncertainty. And of course, there's nothing I could do about it, but I could work with grounding myself to it. I think naming was what I needed to be able to move forward. There were strong, sudden urges while I was working on this series to get up and walk around. I just had to move. And this happens occasionally with all of my projects, but never more often than with this one. Every planet that rotates and revolves around a sun has a terminator. It's the line where night turns into daylight, dark turns into light. I think we can feel when we get close to our own inner terminator, the line that separates something currently hidden from what we might be able to bring into the light. Sometimes we move across that line in a sudden burst of inspiration or insight, and sometimes it's only approachable with patience, pauses, and a lot of self love. I listen to those sudden urges because if I'm honest, they're really urges to escape having to cross that terminator. And I focus on how I'm feeling. It's a signal for noticing and for acknowledging what might be about to happen. Often I can come back to my work within a few minutes, but sometimes I realize I need to stop for the day or longer. And it's not that I can see what it is that I'm getting close to bringing into the light. And it's not that I always get a conscious insight or make a major step in progress when I do come back, but it is a sign that I'm getting close to some inner resistance to that terminator, and giving myself the time I need to settle again before moving forward is one of my highest forms of self care and self love. Cold stone knowing. Everything we have a relationship with, animate or inanimate, brings with it the inevitability of future loss. Things get broken, wear out, or stop working. Pets are lost to one thing or another. Friends move away. Someone stops loving us or they die. There is a day when we wake up without, and we compare it to all of the days we had with. There's this temptation to hang on to the way it used to be, saying, if I only had one last chance to do or to say. That longing can go on forever and get me nowhere. And a better understanding comes when I can let go, knowing that nothing is ever truly lost. The first law of thermodynamics says energy can't be created or destroyed. It just transforms in a way that might be a lot harder for me to access. The thing that is lost to me now follows its own trajectory, its own path, separate from mine. Only an echo away. Often, when we lose something important to us, there are all these reminders hidden in places and ways we never would have guessed. Grief has a way of making you notice everything around you with cutting clarity. It can seem like we're on a battlefield surrounded by echoes of the past that explode at unexpected times. We can remember what we lost with pain. We can remember what we lost with solace. We can remember it wistfully or truthfully or regretfully or with gratefulness. We can't always choose our first reaction to these echoes, how we fill in the time and space that's been created now in this new sense of emptiness. It's often a mix of many things. But I can choose to cultivate the best of those responses, the ones that honor the loss with love. A timeline for falling apart. We can lose something quickly. One moment it's here, and the next moment, through accident or other means, it's not. But most often, I think we lose people slowly. Minds fail, bodies fail, or maybe a relationship just starts to drift away, and those once many connected systems begin to come apart. Loss is usually a very messy process. There are decisions to be made, even if they are only our own internal choices. We have all heard of the stages of grief, but there's no sequential timeline, no order to loss. There's no manual for how to survive the greatest grief, no process to make it hurt less or leave sooner. And I think that avoiding the grief is not the point, because to completely avoid grief, then we have to face the much lonelier path of avoiding loving anything in the first place. And it occurred to me that maybe I was, in a way, writing my own version of a manual, my own timeline for falling apart with these images I was making. And that helped. I think because I felt I did have some say in the process after all, even if I was only documenting it, taking stock of where I was, where I am each day. Practicing impermanence. Our world constantly changes around us, and we ourselves are constantly changing, whether we choose to notice those changes or not. Yet, in big ways and little ways, we still count on some things to remain a constant in our lives. With some losses, you become a different person than you were before. And there's a kind of fear that comes when holding a new loss, the fear of losing yourself in it. While that change is happening, it's true. You don't know what you're going to look like in the future. But I can say this with certainty: the future can always be built on the strengths we carry inside us today. Light speaking to darkness. In my symbolic language of art and also archetypes, light is simply the known, what we can see and understand. And it's also a small, strong flame burning inside each of us that is not only human. The darkness then is just the unknown, the things we can't yet see or understand. Some things are always going to stay in the darkness for us. And the hard truth is that there's more darkness in our lives than light. There will always be more unknowns than knowns. Life is always speaking to death. And if I choose to listen, death is always speaking back. I am a part of that conversation. I can decide what my part looks like, whether I join in that conversation or whether I hide from it. Writing is also a big part of my art practice. And more specifically, I often use writing as poetry, although I rarely share it. The language of poetry forces me to be specific. In order to write poetry about anything, I need to define it as clearly as I can to myself. I think the act of writing helps you see, helps you taste it, helps you smell it, know how it feels to sleep with it and wake up with it. How to hold grief. My sadness is a boat that anchors each night. In my mind, I stand outside it, my heart beating against each board of its hull. I don't look inside. I know what it carries. Sometimes, before dawn, it drifts away, forgotten then in sunlight, only to return with winter's evening tide, as if death, too, needs a safe harbor and to be known, anchoring into the rocks of my bones. Final image in this series is the setting sun somewhere else. Orson Scott Card is, in my opinion, a great contemporary science fiction writer. One of his characters said something I read in a book 40 years ago that I've never forgotten. His protagonist says, "In the moment when I truly understand my enemy, understand him well enough to defeat him, then in that very moment, I also love him." I'm not saying that I want to love, death and grief and loss. I'm not saying that I can fight to defeat them, but I think if I can be honest about my relationship to them and honest in what I know about my place in this vast and achingly beautiful universe, then they no longer have to be my enemies.